The ground shook before the alarms even started. I felt it in my bones, a deep tremor that meant only one thing. The enemy had broken through the eastern line. I grabbed my weapon and ran, my claws digging into the metal floor of the outpost as I moved faster than most creatures could ever hope to move. My name is Draven Kessick, and I have fought in this war since before some of the younger soldiers were born. I am a Threxian, a race known across the galaxy for strength, endurance, and a will that does not bend. We are not gentle creatures. Our bodies are built for war. Thick skin, dense muscle, and instincts sharpened over centuries of conflict. When people speak of monsters in this war, they usually mean us. That night, the base commander pulled me aside before the assignment briefing. She was an older Threxian named Vessa, her face marked with scars from battles fought long before I joined the ranks. She told me I was being placed in a new unit, one built from soldiers of different worlds. Coalition Command wanted to test mixed squads, combining species with different strengths to face the growing threat from the Skarn, a mechanical hive that had been consuming planet after planet along the outer rim. I did not like the idea. Mixed units meant slower reactions, mismatched tactics, and soldiers who did not understand how the others fought. But orders were orders, and I reported to the staging bay as instructed. That was where I first saw them, humans. I had heard about the species before, mostly through rumors passed between soldiers at supply depots. They were said to be small, fragile, and painfully slow compared to the other coalition races. When I walked into that staging bay and saw them standing in a neat row, checking their gear with quiet focus, I understood why the rumors existed. They were short compared to me, barely reaching my chest in height. Their skin was soft, no natural plating, no claws, no fangs. Their weapons looked strange, blocky, and mechanical, nothing like the energy blades and pulse cannons carried by the rest of us. There were 4 of them assigned to my unit. A tall one with short brown hair named Nathan Cole, who seemed to be the squad leader. A shorter woman named Ellen Cross, sharp-eyed and quiet, who moved with a kind of precision that suggested she had trained for years. Another man, broad-shouldered but still small compared to me, named Owen Grant, who kept glancing at his gear as if double-checking everything twice. And the last one, a woman with dark hair pulled back tightly, named Lucy Bennett, who was the only one who looked directly at me without flinching when I entered the room. I remember thinking, these are the soldiers meant to fight beside me against a mechanical horde that had already wiped out 3 border colonies. I remember thinking, this mission is already doomed. Nathan approached me first, extending a hand in greeting. I did not understand the gesture at first, so I simply stared at it until he lowered it with an awkward smile. He introduced himself and the others, speaking in a calm, steady voice despite clearly being nervous around someone twice his size. I gave him my name in return, keeping my tone flat and businesslike. I was not there to make friends. I was there to survive a mission that Command had clearly assembled, without much thought for who would actually make it back alive. Our task was simple on paper. A supply outpost on the fringe world of Calder 9 had gone silent 3 days earlier. Command believed the Skarn had taken it, using it as a staging point to push further into Coalition territory. Our unit was tasked with landing nearby, confirming the situation, and either retaking the outpost or destroying anything valuable before retreating. 6 of us against an unknown number of Skarn units. I had fought worse odds, but never with soldiers I trusted so little. The transport ship rattled as we entered the atmosphere of Calder 9. Through the small viewport, I could see the terrain below, rocky canyons cut through red stone, with the burned outline of the outpost visible near the center of a wide valley. Smoke still rose from several structures. Whatever had happened there, it had happened recently. I checked my weapon one final time, feeling the familiar weight settle into my hands. Beside me, Ellen was doing the same with her rifle, her movements quick and practiced. I noticed she did not seem afraid, not in the way I expected from someone so physically unprepared for this kind of fight. Her eyes were focused, calculating, studying the terrain data scrolling across a small screen mounted on her wrist. Owen sat across from me, running through some kind of mental checklist under his breath, listing supplies and contingencies. Lucy was quiet, her gaze fixed on the horizon as the ship descended, her jaw set in a way that reminded me of soldiers preparing for something they already knew would be difficult. Nathan stood near the exit ramp, giving final instructions to his team in low, clear tones. He turned to me and asked if I had any suggestions based on my experience fighting the Skarn. I was surprised by the question. Most commanders from other species assumed I would simply follow orders without offering input. I told him the truth. The Skarn moved in coordinated swarms, using sheer numbers to overwhelm defenses rather than relying on individual strength. Their weakness was in disrupting their communication network, which caused their coordination to break down into chaos. Nathan nodded, taking the information seriously, and adjusted the plans slightly based on what I said. It was a small thing, but it surprised me. I had expected to be treated as a weapon to be pointed at the enemy, not a soldier whose opinion mattered. The ship landed hard against the rocky ground, kicking up a cloud of red dust as the ramp lowered. We moved out quickly, spreading into a formation that Nathan called out with quiet efficiency. I took the front position, my size and strength making me the natural choice to absorb the first contact if the enemy was waiting for us. The humans fell into position behind and around me, moving with more coordination than I expected from a species so physically limited. The outpost ahead was silent, too silent. No movement, no sound except the wind cutting through the canyon walls. I raised a hand, signaling the group to stop as we approached the outer perimeter fence, which had been torn open in several places, the metal bent and twisted as if something powerful had forced its way through. Ellen crouched near the opening, examining the damage with quick, careful movements. She said something to Nathan in a low voice, pointing at marks in the dirt that I could barely make out even with my sharper eyesight. Owen moved to check a nearby structure, his weapon raised, scanning the windows and doorways for any sign of movement. I felt the tension building, that familiar pressure before violence erupts, and my body tensed in preparation. Whatever had happened here, we were about to find out. Lucy signaled from the far side of the perimeter, waving us over with a sharp, practiced motion. She had found something. We moved quickly across the open ground, staying low, weapons ready. When we reached her position, she pointed toward the main structure of the outpost, where the entrance had been completely destroyed, the heavy door blown outward as though something had escaped rather than entered. Nathan crouched beside her, studying the scene with a focused expression. He asked me what I thought had happened, and I told him honestly. This did not look like a typical Skarn assault. Their attacks were methodical, breaking down defenses in a calculated pattern. This looked rushed, desperate, as if whoever had been inside had fought their way out rather than being overrun from the outside. That thought sent a chill through me, something I rarely felt in combat situations. If the defenders had escaped, where were they now? And what had they been running from? We moved toward the entrance, forming a tight formation as we prepared to enter the darkened structure. The air inside smelled of burned metal and something else, something I could not immediately identify. My eyes adjusted quickly to the dim lighting, picking out shapes in the darkness that made my stomach tighten. The interior of the outpost had been torn apart. Consoles smashed, walls scarred with deep gouges, debris scattered across the floor in a pattern that suggested a desperate struggle. There was no sign of the original defenders, only evidence of chaos and destruction. Owen moved carefully through the wreckage, scanning for any surviving systems that might still hold useful data. Ellen kept watch near the entrance, her rifle steady despite the tension clearly building in her posture. Nathan directed the group with quiet efficiency, his voice calm, even as the situation grew more unsettling by the moment. I moved deeper into the structure, my senses sharp, listening for any sound that might indicate we were not alone. That was when I heard it, a faint mechanical clicking sound coming from somewhere below us, echoing up through a maintenance shaft near the back of the building. I raised a hand, signaling the others to stop and listen. The clicking grew louder, more rhythmic, unmistakably the sound of Skarn movement patterns, the coordinated shifting of their mechanical limbs against metal surfaces. Whatever had happened to the outpost defenders, the Skarn were still here, somewhere beneath us, and they knew we had arrived. Nathan's expression did not change much, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes as he processed the situation and began forming a plan. He turned to his team and gave a series of quick, clear instructions, positioning Ellen near the shaft entrance, sending Owen to secure the perimeter, and keeping Lucy close to monitor communications back to our transport. I expected fear from them. I expected hesitation, the kind of freezing panic that often came from soldiers facing an enemy as terrifying as the scarn for the first time. Instead, I saw something else entirely. Focus, discipline, a calm readiness that did not match the fragile appearance of their bodies. The clicking sound grew louder still, and then the shaft cover beneath our feet began to shake violently, metal groaning under pressure from below. Whatever was coming, it was coming fast, and it was coming directly toward us. I positioned myself near the shaft, my weapon ready, muscles tensed for whatever would emerge. Behind me, I heard the humans moving into position, their footsteps light but purposeful against the debris-covered floor. For the first time since arriving on this mission, I found myself wondering if perhaps I had misjudged these small, fragile-looking soldiers standing beside me. The shaft cover exploded upward, metal shrapnel scattering across the room, and the true nature of this mission revealed itself in the darkness rising up from below. A shape burst through the opening, jagged limbs of dark metal scraping against the torn edges of the shaft. It was a Skarn scout unit, low to the ground, moving on 6 segmented legs with a speed that would catch most soldiers off guard. Its central body glowed faint blue, sensors scanning the room in rapid pulses as it locked onto the nearest target. I moved first, my instincts taking over as I swung my weapon down toward the creature, but it was faster than I expected, twisting away from my strike and skittering toward Ellen's position near the wall. I braced myself to intervene, certain she would need my protection, but she was already moving. She dropped to one knee, fired 2 precise shots into the joints of its front legs, and rolled to the side as the creature stumbled and crashed into the debris beside her. Owen finished it with a single shot to its central sensor, the blue glow flickering out as the machine collapsed into stillness. The entire exchange had taken only a few seconds, faster than I could have reacted on my own. I stared at the fallen machine, then at Ellen, who was already back on her feet, checking her weapon and scanning for further threats. There was no panic in her movements, no hesitation. She had reacted with the kind of precision I associated with soldiers who had trained for years in close combat, yet she stood barely taller than my shoulder and looked as though a strong wind could knock her over. More clicking sounds echoed from below, growing louder, multiplying. Nathan's voice cut through the tension, calm but urgent, ordering the group to fall back toward the main entrance. I did not argue. Retreating from a swarm was often the wisest choice, even for a Threxian. We moved quickly, but not carelessly. Lucy took point near the doorway, watching for movement outside while the rest of us covered the retreat. Owen and Ellen moved in a coordinated pattern I had never seen before, one covering high, while the other covered low, switching positions smoothly without needing to speak. It reminded me of a dance more than combat, each movement calculated to protect the other without wasted motion. Outside, the canyon walls cast long shadows as the sun began to set, painting the red stone in deep shades of orange. We regrouped near the outer fence, weapons still raised, watching the shattered entrance for signs of pursuit. The clicking sound faded, then stopped entirely, leaving only the wind whistling through the broken structures. Nathan called for a status check, and each member of the team responded quickly, confirming they were unharmed. I found myself doing the same, reporting my own condition out of habit, though I usually fought alone and rarely needed to answer to anyone. We made camp a short distance from the outpost, using the natural cover of a rocky outcrop to shield us from view. Nathan set a watch rotation, and I offered to take the first shift, expecting the humans to need rest more than I did. To my surprise, Lucy insisted on joining me, saying she preferred to stay alert until she better understood the terrain. We sat in silence for a while, watching the darkening canyon below. I studied her out of the corner of my eye, trying to understand what kind of soldier she was. She did not look like a warrior in the way I understood the word. Her body carried no obvious strength, no natural weapons, nothing that marked her as dangerous at first glance. I asked her, bluntly, how she had survived combat training given how fragile her body seemed compared to other species in the coalition. She did not seem offended by the question, only thoughtful, as if she had been asked something similar before. She explained that humans had never been the strongest or fastest species on their homeworld. Their bodies were not built for raw combat the way mine was. Instead, they had built their strength through cooperation, through strategy, through relentless preparation and the refusal to accept defeat as an option. She spoke of drills that lasted for days, of training exercises designed to push the body and mind beyond what seemed possible, of a culture that valued endurance and determination as much as any physical trait. I found myself listening more closely than I expected. I had assumed the humans compensated for their physical weakness through technology alone, but she described something deeper, a mindset built into how they approached every challenge. Even now, facing an enemy that could tear through most soldiers with ease, she showed no fear, only calculation and quiet resolve. The night passed without incident, though the distant sound of scarn movement echoed occasionally through the canyon, reminding us we were far from safe. When morning came, Nathan gathered the team to discuss our next move. Command wanted confirmation of the scarn presence and, if possible, information about their numbers and positioning before deciding whether to send a larger force. We approached the outpost again, more cautiously this time, using the lessons learned from the previous encounter. Owen suggested using a small device from his pack, a compact scanner that could detect movement through solid structures. I had never seen technology like it before, compact and efficient in ways that surprised me given how limited human physical capability seemed. The scanner revealed a significant presence beneath the outpost, an underground network of tunnels extending far beyond what any of us had expected. Ellen studied the readout carefully, calculating potential troop movements and defensive positions with an efficiency that reminded me of experienced Threxian strategists I had served under during previous campaigns. Nathan made the call to investigate further, but cautiously, sending Owen and Ellen ahead to scout the tunnel entrance while the rest of us provided cover from a distance. I watched them move, low and quiet, communicating through small hand signals rather than speech, coordinating their approach with a level of trust that seemed to come from years of working together despite their relatively young appearance. The tunnel entrance was hidden beneath a collapsed section of the outpost floor, revealed only after clearing away debris that had fallen during the previous night's chaos. Ellen knelt beside the opening, studying the darkness below with a small light attached to her weapon, while Owen kept watch behind her. I moved closer, curious despite the danger, and peered down into the shaft. The tunnel extended far below the surface, curving out of sight, the walls marked with strange symbols that I did not recognize. This was clearly not a temporary structure built for a single raid. The Scarn had been preparing something larger. Something that suggested a permanent foothold on Calder 9. Lucy relayed this information back to our transport, requesting additional guidance from command while Nathan considered our options. We could retreat and report the discovery, allowing a larger force to handle the situation properly, or we could attempt to gather more information about the scale of the threat before making our next move. Before a decision could be made, the ground trembled again, more violently this time, and the tunnel entrance widened as something massive began to force its way upward from below. I recognized the shape immediately, a Scarn-heavy unit, far larger than the scout we had encountered the previous night, its armored body glowing with an intense blue light as it emerged from the darkness. Panic would have been the reasonable response. Instead, I watched as Nathan's team moved into action with practiced precision, each member falling into a role without needing instruction. Owen retreated toward higher ground, providing covering fire while Ellen moved to flank the creature's exposed joints. Lucy remained near the communication equipment, calling for immediate evacuation support while continuing to monitor the situation. I moved to engage directly, my strength and size giving me the best chance of slowing the creature down while the humans executed whatever plan they had quickly assembled. The Scarn-heavy unit swung a massive limb toward me, and I barely managed to deflect the blow, feeling the impact reverberate through my entire body despite my natural resilience. Ellen's shots found their mark against the creature's rear joints, causing it to stumble slightly, giving me the opening I needed to strike at its exposed central chamber. The creature let out a piercing mechanical shriek, thrashing wildly as it attempted to regain balance, its remaining limbs tearing through the surrounding structure in a desperate attempt to eliminate the threats surrounding it. Owen's precise shots continued to find weak points in its armor, each strike calculated rather than random, chipping away at its defenses with methodical patience despite the chaos of the fight. I found myself impressed by the coordination on display, a level of tactical awareness that rivaled anything I had seen from soldiers of far more physically capable species. The creature finally collapsed after a sustained assault from all directions, its central chamber destroyed by a combination of my direct strikes and the precise, calculated fire from Ellen and Owen. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the distant hum of our transport approaching for extraction. Nathan called the retreat, and we moved quickly back toward the landing site, carrying with us confirmation of what Command needed to know. The Skarn were building something significant beneath Calder 9, and the small team that had been sent to investigate had proven far more capable than I had ever expected. As we boarded the transport, I found myself reconsidering everything I thought I understood about these soldiers. They lacked the physical advantages that defined strength among most species I had encountered throughout my years of service. Yet they had faced a creature capable of crushing me with a single well-placed blow, and they had done so with calm precision rather than desperate panic. I still believed, at that point, that their strength came primarily from cleverness and technology rather than anything resembling true power. I had seen many species use intelligence to compensate for physical limitations throughout the war, and I assumed humans simply represented another example of this pattern. I did not yet understand how wrong that assumption truly was, nor did I understand what would happen when these soldiers were pushed far beyond the limits of careful strategy and calculated precision into something far more dangerous. The transport lifted off, carrying us away from Calder 9 and toward a debriefing that would soon reveal just how serious the threat beneath that canyon truly was. None of us knew yet that this had only been the beginning of a much larger storm gathering across the outer rim, one that would test every soldier in our unit far beyond anything we had faced so far. The debriefing room aboard the fleet carrier Halden's Reach was crowded with officers from a dozen different species when we arrived. Vesa stood near the central display, her expression grim as she studied the data Ellen had transmitted from Calder 9. When we walked in, the room fell quiet, every eye turning toward the small human team that had somehow survived an encounter with a Skarn-heavy unit and returned with detailed intelligence. Vesa asked Nathan to walk the room through what had happened, and he did so with the same calm precision he had shown throughout the mission, describing the tunnel network, the heavy unit, and the strange symbols carved into the walls below the outpost. Several of the other officers exchanged glances, clearly surprised by the thoroughness of the report. A coalition analyst, a tall insectoid creature named Kess, examined the images Owen had captured and confirmed our worst fears. The symbols matched patterns seen only once before, during the fall of a distant colony 3 years earlier, right before the Skarn had unleashed something far larger than any unit we had encountered so far. Command believed Calder 9 was being prepared as a staging ground for a similar assault, one that could threaten several nearby systems if not stopped quickly. Vesa ordered a larger strike force assembled, combining several squads from different species to retake the outpost and destroy the underground network before the Skarn could complete whatever they were building. Our unit, having already gathered critical intelligence, was assigned to lead the ground assault alongside 2 additional squads of Threxian soldiers and a support team of engineers tasked with sealing the tunnels permanently. I expected the humans to be reassigned to a support role given the danger involved, but Nathan requested that his team remain on the front line, citing their familiarity with the terrain and the tunnel entrance. Vesa considered the request carefully before agreeing, though I could see the concern in her expression as she studied the small group standing before her. We had 2 days to prepare before the strike force would launch its assault. I spent much of that time in the training bay, sharpening my weapons and reviewing tactical data, but I found myself returning to something Lucy had said the previous night, about human culture valuing preparation and endurance above raw strength. I began paying closer attention to how the team trained during those 2 days, curious to understand more about what made them different from every other species I had fought beside. What I observed surprised me. While most soldiers rested and recovered between missions, the human team continued training relentlessly, running through scenarios again and again, adjusting their tactics based on small mistakes only they seemed to notice. Ellen practiced her aim for hours, adjusting for different types of Skarn armor plating. Owen studied the tunnel schematics repeatedly, memorizing every twist and turn until he could draw the layout from memory. Lucy worked with the communication systems, testing backup channels in case the primary network failed during the assault. Nathan spent most of his time reviewing contingency plans, preparing for scenarios that seemed unlikely, but which he insisted on addressing anyway. When I asked him why he spent so much energy planning for situations that probably would not occur, he told me something I would remember for the rest of my life. He said that humans had learned, through centuries of difficult history, that the situations you fail to prepare for are always the ones that eventually happen. He said hope was not a strategy, and that the only real advantage his people had ever possessed was the refusal to leave anything to chance. I did not fully understand what he meant at the time, though the words stayed with me as the day of the assault approached. The strike force launched at dawn, dropping into the canyon near Calder 9 under cover of a heavy dust storm that Ellen had predicted would provide additional concealment for our approach. The engineers moved quickly toward the tunnel entrance, setting up equipment designed to collapse the network once we confirmed it was safe to do so. The rest of us spread out to secure the perimeter, watching for any sign of Skarn movement. For the first hour, everything proceeded according to plan. The engineers worked steadily, the perimeter remained secure, and Vessa's forces began pushing deeper into the outpost to clear any remaining threats. I allowed myself a brief moment of confidence, believing this assault would proceed far more smoothly than our initial encounter with the Skarn. That confidence shattered the moment the ground began to shake with an intensity far greater than anything we had experienced before. The tunnel entrance exploded outward, and dozens of Skarn units poured into the canyon, far more than our intelligence had predicted. Among them, moving with terrifying speed, was something none of us had ever seen before, a massive creature unlike any Skarn unit in our records, its body composed of dozens of smaller units fused together into a single towering form. Chaos erupted immediately. Soldiers scattered, seeking cover as weapons fire filled the canyon with blinding flashes of light. I heard Vessa shouting orders over the comm channel, trying to organize a coordinated defense, but the sheer number of enemy units overwhelmed our initial formations within minutes. I found myself separated from the human team during the initial confusion, fighting alongside a group of Threxian soldiers as we attempted to hold a defensive line near the outpost entrance. The massive fused creature moved through our ranks with devastating force, tossing soldiers aside as though they weighed nothing, its multiple limbs striking in patterns too complex to predict or defend against effectively. 2 Threxian soldiers fell before my eyes, their armor unable to withstand the creature's strength, and panic began to spread through our ranks despite our species' reputation for fearlessness in battle. I had never witnessed my own people falter this way, and the sight left me more shaken than I wanted to admit. Through the chaos, I heard Nathan's voice cutting through the comm channel, calm and steady despite the clear danger surrounding him. He was coordinating his team's position, directing them toward a defensive formation near a collapsed section of the outpost wall, using the terrain to their advantage despite being vastly outnumbered. I fought my way toward their position, cutting through smaller Skarn units as I moved, desperate to reach the small team before the massive creature turned its attention toward them. When I finally broke through the chaos and reached their location, what I found stopped me in my tracks. The human team had not panicked. They had not scattered or fled despite facing overwhelming odds. Instead, they had transformed the collapsed section of wall into a fortified position, using debris and equipment to create a defensible perimeter that funneled approaching enemies into a narrow kill zone where their combined firepower could be maximized. Ellen and Owen worked in perfect synchronization, alternating fire to prevent any gaps in their defense, while Lucy managed a portable device that seemed to be jamming the coordination signals between smaller Skarn units, causing confusion among the swarm that would have otherwise overwhelmed their position entirely. Nathan directed the defense with unwavering focus, adjusting their formation in real time as new threats emerged from different directions. I joined their position, adding my strength to their defense, and for a brief moment I believed we might actually hold against the assault. Then the massive fused creature turned its attention toward us, having finally located what it seemed to recognize as the source of the coordination disrupting its smaller units. It moved toward our position with terrifying speed, and I realized with growing horror that nothing we had encountered so far could withstand a direct assault from something this powerful. I prepared myself to intercept the creature, knowing that my body offered the only realistic chance of slowing it down long enough for the others to retreat to safety. Before I could move, Nathan issued a series of rapid commands that I did not fully understand at the time. Ellen and Owen shifted their fire pattern, targeting specific points along the creature's body that I would not have identified as weaknesses on my own. Lucy adjusted her jamming device, focusing its signal directly at the creature's central mass rather than the smaller units surrounding it. The massive creature staggered, its movements becoming erratic as the jamming signal disrupted whatever coordination allowed its many fused components to function as a single unit. I seized the opportunity, charging forward and striking at the exposed seams between its fused segments, areas that Ellen's earlier shots had already weakened significantly. The creature let out a deafening mechanical roar, thrashing wildly as its components began to separate under the combined assault. I continued striking at the weakened points, using every ounce of strength I possessed, while the human team maintained their disruption of its coordination systems, preventing it from mounting any effective counterattack. It took several more minutes of sustained, combined effort before the creature finally collapsed, its massive form breaking apart into dozens of inert scarn units scattered across the canyon floor. The surrounding smaller units, no longer receiving coordination from their central mass, fell into disarray, becoming far easier targets for the remaining coalition forces to eliminate. As the battle began turning in our favor, I looked toward the human team, still positioned within their fortified defense, already preparing for whatever might come next rather than celebrating the victory we had just achieved. Their discipline in that moment struck me more deeply than anything I had witnessed throughout the entire mission. The remaining Skarn forces retreated back into the tunnel network, allowing the engineers to complete their work sealing the underground passages permanently. Vesa called for a full withdrawal once the immediate threat had been neutralized, and our forces began the process of regrouping and treating the wounded scattered throughout the canyon. I helped carry an injured Threxian soldier back toward the extraction point, my mind still processing everything I had witnessed during the assault. The human team had faced a threat capable of destroying soldiers far stronger than themselves, and rather than breaking under that pressure, they had found a way to turn the situation to their advantage through discipline, preparation, and an unwillingness to abandon their position despite overwhelming odds. As we regrouped at the extraction site, Vesa approached the human team directly, something I had rarely seen her do with soldiers outside her own species. She thanked them personally for their role in neutralizing the fused creature, acknowledging that their tactical response had likely saved dozens of lives throughout the canyon that day. Nathan accepted the acknowledgement with quiet humility, deflecting much of the credit toward his team rather than himself. I noticed Ellen and Owen exchanging a brief glance, a silent communication that suggested this was not the first time they had faced impossible odds and found a way through them together. As the transport lifted off, carrying us away from Calder 9 once again, I found myself sitting near Lucy, still processing the events of the day. I asked her how they had managed to remain so composed while facing a creature that had already killed soldiers far stronger than themselves. She looked at me for a long moment before answering, her expression thoughtful rather than proud. She said that humans had learned long ago that strength measured only in muscle, and claws would always eventually meet something stronger. Real strength, she explained, came from refusing to accept that any situation was beyond solving, no matter how impossible it appeared at first glance. I did not fully understand the weight of her words yet, though I sensed we had only begun to see what these small, seemingly fragile soldiers were truly capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. The battle at Calder 9 had revealed something larger stirring within the Skarn forces, something far more dangerous than a single fused creature, and I could not shake the growing feeling that the true test of everything I had witnessed so far was still waiting for us somewhere ahead. 3 weeks passed before the next call came, and in that time I found myself spending more hours around the human team than I ever expected when this assignment first began. We were stationed together aboard the Halden's Reach, awaiting reassignment, while intelligence teams analyzed the symbols recovered from Calder 9. I learned that the massive fused creature we had destroyed was not an isolated event. Similar signals had been detected across 3 other systems along the outer rim, suggesting the Skarn were preparing something on a scale the Coalition had never faced before. During those weeks, I began training alongside Nathan's team. Partly out of curiosity, and partly because Vesa had suggested it might improve coordination for future missions. What started as simple observation became something closer to genuine partnership. I taught Owen techniques for close combat that could compensate for his smaller size, showing him how to use leverage and timing rather than raw strength. In return, he taught me how to read terrain the way his people did, identifying choke points and defensive positions that I had never considered despite decades of combat experience. Ellen and I spent hours discussing tactics, comparing Threxian combat doctrine with human strategic thinking. I found her mind remarkably sharp, capable of identifying weaknesses in plans that seemed flawless to me at first glance. She explained that human military history was filled with examples of smaller, weaker forces defeating larger enemies through superior strategy and unbreakable resolve. And she spoke of these historical conflicts with a reverence that suggested they were not simply stories, but foundational lessons passed down through generations. Lucy remained quieter than the others, but during one evening while we stood watch together on the observation deck, she opened up about her own history. She told me she had lost her brother during an earlier engagement with the Skarn, years before humans had officially joined the Coalition. She explained that this loss had shaped her decision to enlist, driven not by anger, but by a determination to ensure that others would not suffer the same fate if she could help prevent it. I found myself sharing more of my own history in return, something I rarely did with soldiers from other species. I told her about my early years training in the mountain regions of my homeworld, where Threxian warriors were tested against the harsh environment long before ever facing an enemy in combat. I explained that strength, in my culture, had always been measured through physical endurance and raw power, values instilled in us from birth. She listened carefully, then asked me a question that stayed with me long after our conversation ended. She asked whether I still believed that strength could only be measured through physical power, given everything I had witnessed her team accomplish over the past few weeks. I did not have a clear answer for her at the time, though I found myself questioning assumptions I had carried throughout my entire life. Nathan, meanwhile, spent much of his free time reviewing intelligence reports, searching for patterns in the Skarn activity that others had overlooked. He approached Vesa directly on several occasions, presenting theories about the true scale of what the Skarn were preparing. Most officers dismissed his concerns as overly cautious speculation, but Vesa, having witnessed his tactical instincts firsthand at Calder 9, took his warnings more seriously than most. His theory proved correct sooner than any of us expected. New intelligence arrived confirming that the Skarn had been constructing something enormous beneath the surface of a heavily fortified world called Threnos Prime, a planet that served as a critical junction point for Coalition supply lines throughout the Outer Rim. If the Skarn succeeded in whatever they were building there, it would threaten not just a single system, but the entire supply network supporting Coalition forces across dozens of worlds. Vesa was placed in command of a massive combined assault force tasked with striking Threnos Prime before the Skarn could complete their construction. Every available unit was called into service, including our small squad, which had proven its worth far beyond what anyone had initially expected from a team built primarily around human soldiers. The scale of the coming battle became clear during the final briefing before deployment. Thousands of soldiers from every Coalition species would be involved, supported by a full fleet presence in orbit above Threnos Prime. Intelligence estimated the Skarn presence on the planet numbered in the tens of thousands, including multiple fused creatures, similar to what we had encountered at Calder 9, and possibly something even larger at the center of their construction efforts. I stood beside Nathan during the briefing, watching as he studied the tactical maps with the same intense focus he brought to every challenge. He asked pointed questions that made several officers visibly uncomfortable, questions about contingency plans for scenarios that seemed unlikely, but which he insisted needed answers before the assault began. Vesa addressed each question directly, and I noticed a growing respect in her tone whenever she spoke with him, a respect that had not existed when this mission first began. Our squad was assigned to a critical role in the assault, tasked with infiltrating the central construction site alongside several other specialized teams, while the main force engaged the bulk of the Skarn defenses across the planet's surface. Command believed that destroying whatever was being built at the center of the operation would cripple the entire Skarn effort, regardless of how many soldiers they had stationed elsewhere. The night before deployment, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind replaying everything I had witnessed over the past several weeks. I walked through the quiet corridors of the Halden's Reach and found Nathan alone in the training bay, still reviewing tactical data despite the late hour. I asked him if he ever doubted his ability to lead his team through what was coming. He admitted that doubt was a constant companion, something he never fully escaped no matter how much preparation he completed. But he explained that doubt was not something to be eliminated, only managed and channeled into further preparation. He told me that the difference between soldiers who survived impossible situations and those who did not often came down to a simple choice, whether to let fear paralyze action or to let it sharpen focus instead. I asked him what he believed truly separated humans from every other species he had encountered throughout the war. He considered the question carefully before answering, choosing his words with the same precision he applied to every tactical decision. He said that humans had spent their entire history facing threats that should have destroyed them many times over, disasters and conflicts that seemed impossible to survive. Yet they had always found a way through, not because any individual human was particularly strong, but because they refused to accept defeat as a permanent condition, always searching for another path forward, no matter how bleak the situation appeared. He said something else that night that I have never forgotten. He told me that when humans faced true desperation, when every conventional option had been exhausted, something changed in how they approached the problem. He called it the breaking point, the moment when careful strategy gave way to something more primal, a refusal to stop fighting regardless of the cost, driven by a collective will that seemed to draw strength from every human soldier around them rather than from any single individual. I did not fully understand what he meant, though something in his tone suggested he was preparing me for what was about to happen on Threnos Prime. The following morning, our forces launched the largest coordinated assault the Coalition had attempted since the war began, descending upon Threnos Prime under the cover of a massive orbital bombardment designed to weaken the outer Skarn defenses before ground forces made planetfall. Our squad's transport broke away from the main formation as we approached our designated landing zone near the central construction site. Through the viewport, I could see the scale of the battle already unfolding across the planet's surface, explosions lighting up the horizon in every direction as thousands of soldiers engaged the Skarn defenses. We landed in a narrow canyon that Owen had identified during mission planning as offering the most direct route toward the central construction site while avoiding the heaviest concentrations of enemy forces. The plan called for a quick, quiet infiltration, using stealth rather than direct confrontation to reach our objective before the Skarn could reinforce their central defenses. For the first hour, the plan proceeded exactly as designed. We moved through the canyon quickly and quietly, avoiding several patrol groups through careful timing and Ellen's precise reading of enemy movement patterns. Lucy's jamming equipment proved invaluable, disrupting local communication signals just enough to prevent our presence from being detected without alerting the Skarn to active interference. As we approached the final stretch before reaching the construction site, everything changed in an instant. A patrol group we had failed to detect emerged from a side passage, immediately alerting the surrounding Skarn forces to our presence. Within minutes, the quiet infiltration we had carefully planned collapsed into a desperate fight for survival as reinforcements began converging on our position from multiple directions. I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before intense combat, but this time it was accompanied by something else, a growing awareness that we had walked into a situation far more dangerous than anything we had faced before. The central construction site ahead of us, now visible through the canyon opening, revealed something that made my blood run cold despite my species' natural resilience against fear. At the heart of the site stood a structure unlike anything I had seen in my years of fighting the Skarn, a massive tower of fused metal and pulsing energy that extended high above the surrounding terrain, surrounded by dozens of the fused creatures we had encountered before, each one larger and more heavily armored than anything from Calder 9. This was not simply a staging ground. This was the true heart of whatever the Skarn had been building across multiple systems, and we had arrived just as it appeared close to completion. Nathan's voice cut through the chaos, calm despite the overwhelming scale of what we now faced. He called for immediate reinforcement from the main assault force, but the response confirmed our worst fears. Every available unit was already engaged elsewhere across the planet, fighting their own desperate battles against the broader Skarn defense network. We were on our own, facing an enemy force that dwarfed anything our small squad had encountered before, with the fate of the entire assault potentially resting on whether we could disrupt whatever was happening at that central tower before it activated completely. I looked toward Nathan, expecting to see fear or hesitation in his expression as the reality of our situation became clear. Instead, I saw something I would remember for the rest of my life, a calm, focused determination that seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker as the odds against us continued to increase. He turned to his team, and in that moment, I finally understood what he had meant the previous night about the breaking point, about the moment when human resolve transformed into something far more dangerous than careful strategy alone. Nathan gathered the team into a tight formation behind a rocky outcrop, the sound of approaching Skarn forces growing louder with every passing second. He did not waste time on lengthy explanations. Instead, he laid out a plan with rapid precision, assigning each member of the team a specific role in what he called a full commitment strategy, a plan that abandoned caution entirely in favor of maximum impact regardless of personal risk. Ellen would take the highest position available, using the canyon walls to create a vantage point from which she could target the weak points on the fused creatures as they approached. Owen would handle demolition charges he had carried for the mission, originally intended for a quieter approach to the tower, but now repurposed for a direct assault on its foundation. Lucy would maintain communication with the fleet, coordinating any possible support while managing the jamming equipment to create as much confusion among the Skarn forces as possible. Nathan himself would lead the direct engagement, drawing the attention of the largest threats while creating openings for the rest of the team to execute their portions of the plan. I told him this plan meant near certain injury for whoever engaged the fused creatures directly, and he acknowledged this without hesitation, stating simply that someone needed to create the opening, and that his position made the most tactical sense given his combat training. I offered to take his place, given my superior physical strength, but he refused, explaining that the plan required speed and precision alongside strength, something he believed his years of specialized training had prepared him for more effectively than raw power alone. I had never seen a commander so willingly place themselves in the most dangerous position of a battle, not out of recklessness, but out of calculated necessity. This was not the behavior I had come to expect from a species I had once dismissed as fragile and weak. This was the behavior of a warrior who understood that true strength sometimes meant accepting the greatest personal risk to protect the mission and the soldiers depending on it. The assault began the moment the first wave of Skarn units entered the canyon. Ellen's shots rang out from her elevated position, precise and devastating, taking down smaller units before they could reach our position, while marking weak points on the approaching fused creatures for the rest of us to target. Owen moved with surprising speed toward the base of the tower, weaving through the chaos with the demolition charges strapped securely to his back, using every scrap of cover available to avoid the concentrated fire converging on our position. I moved alongside Nathan, engaging the nearest fused creature directly, my strength allowing me to absorb blows that would have instantly killed most soldiers, while creating openings for Nathan to strike at vulnerable points I could not reach on my own. His movements were faster than I expected, weaving between the creature's massive limbs with precision that seemed almost impossible given the danger surrounding him. The battle grew more desperate with every passing minute. More Skarn forces converged on our position, drawn by the disturbance at their central construction site, and I began to understand the true scale of what we were facing. This was not a battle we could win through conventional combat alone, no matter how skilled or determined we were. The numbers against us were simply too overwhelming. Lucy's voice crackled through the comm channel, informing us that fleet support remained unavailable, still engaged elsewhere across the planet. We were truly alone, facing what appeared to be an impossible situation with no realistic path to victory through normal means. That was when I witnessed something I had never seen before, something that fundamentally changed my understanding of what humans were truly capable of when pushed beyond every reasonable limit. Nathan's demeanor shifted entirely. The careful, calculated commander I had come to know disappeared, replaced by something far more intense, a soldier operating on pure will rather than tactical calculation, moving with a ferocity that seemed to defy the physical limitations of his species. He charged directly into the largest fused creature we had encountered so far, ignoring the danger entirely, striking at its central mass with a combination of improvised weapons and sheer determination that should not have been possible for someone of his size and strength. I moved to support him, but found myself struggling to keep pace with the intensity of his assault, watching as he absorbed blows that would have incapacitated most soldiers, continuing to fight despite injuries that were clearly taking a toll on his body. Ellen and Owen, witnessing their commander's transformation, responded with an intensity that matched his own. Ellen abandoned her elevated position, moving down into direct combat range despite the increased danger, her shots becoming faster and more precise as she pushed herself beyond what I had believed her capable of. Owen reached the base of the tower and began placing his demolition charges with rapid efficiency, working through incoming fire that should have made such precise work impossible. Lucy, still managing communications, began redirecting the jamming equipment toward the largest fused creature, focusing every available resource on disrupting its coordination systems despite the risk this posed, by leaving our own communication vulnerable to interference. Every member of the team had transitioned into what Nathan had called the breaking point, a state where careful strategy gave way entirely to unrelenting determination, where personal safety became secondary to accomplishing the mission regardless of cost. I found myself caught up in the same intensity, my own combat instincts sharpening as I fought alongside soldiers who refused to yield despite facing odds that should have overwhelmed us many times over. Together, we pushed back against the largest fused creature, striking at every exposed weakness with coordinated precision that seemed to draw strength from the collective determination of the entire team rather than any individual effort alone. The creature finally began to falter under the sustained assault, its movements becoming erratic as Lucy's jamming signal disrupted its coordination, while Nathan and I continued striking at its weakened structure. With a final, desperate effort, Nathan drove a makeshift weapon directly into the creature's exposed central chamber, and it collapsed with a deafening mechanical shriek that echoed throughout the canyon. But the battle was far from over. Dozens more Skarn units continued converging on our position, and the tower at the center of the construction site began to hum with an intensity that suggested it was approaching full activation. Owen shouted that his charges were in place, but needed additional time to properly disable the tower's foundation, time we did not have given the overwhelming forces still bearing down on our position. This was the moment I truly understood what Nathan had meant about human resolve transforming into something beyond calculated strategy. Rather than retreating to preserve what remained of our small team, every soldier redoubled their efforts, holding the line around the tower despite injuries and exhaustion, buying Owen the precious seconds he needed to complete his work. I fought alongside them, my own strength failing to match the sheer intensity I witnessed from soldiers who should have been physically overwhelmed by the situation surrounding us. Ellen took a serious injury to her shoulder, but continued firing with her uninjured arm, refusing to fall back despite the clear pain evident on her face. Lucy maintained her position near the communication equipment even as smaller Skarn units breached our perimeter, fighting them off with a combat knife despite having no formal training in close-quarters combat. Nathan, bleeding from multiple wounds sustained during his assault on the fused creature, continued directing the defense with unwavering focus, his voice steady despite the clear physical toll the battle had taken on his body. I had never witnessed such determination from any soldier throughout my entire career, and I found myself fighting harder than I ever had before, driven not by my own natural instincts alone, but by the example set by the humans surrounding me. Owen finally completed his work on the demolition charges, shouting for everyone to retreat toward the canyon entrance as he activated the detonation sequence. We fell back as quickly as possible, the remaining Skarn forces pursuing relentlessly as we made our way through the chaos toward safety. The tower behind us continued humming with increasing intensity, and I feared we would not clear the blast radius before the charges detonated. The explosion, when it finally came, was more powerful than anything Owen's original charges should have produced alone. I later learned that the destabilized energy core within the tower had reacted catastrophically with the demolition charges, creating a chain reaction that destroyed not only the tower itself, but every fused creature and Skarn unit within a significant radius of the central construction site. The shockwave threw us forward, and I instinctively curled my body around Lucy, who had been closest to me during the retreat, shielding her from the worst of the debris that followed the initial blast. When the dust finally settled, I found myself lying against the canyon floor, my ears ringing, my body battered but intact. I forced myself upright, immediately searching for the rest of the team amid the wreckage and settling dust. Nathan lay nearby, unconscious but breathing, his injuries severe but not immediately life-threatening. Ellen was already moving toward him despite her own wounded shoulder, applying emergency treatment with practiced efficiency despite the pain clearly evident in her movements. Owen emerged from behind a fallen section of rock, bruised but functional, immediately assisting with the emergency response. Lucy, though shaken by the blast, remained conscious and quickly re-established communication with the fleet, reporting our position and requesting immediate extraction. I looked back toward where the tower had stood only minutes before, now nothing more than scattered wreckage and settling dust. The surrounding Skarn forces that had once seemed so overwhelming reduced to inactive debris scattered across the canyon floor. Our small team, facing odds that should have guaranteed our destruction, had somehow found a way through the impossible, driven by a resolve I still struggled to fully comprehend. Extraction arrived within the hour, and as we boarded the transport carrying Nathan's still unconscious form toward emergency medical treatment, I found myself reflecting on everything I had witnessed since first meeting this small human team weeks earlier. I had entered this assignment believing physical strength alone defined true capability in combat, viewing humans as a fragile species, compensating for their weakness through cleverness and technology. What I had witnessed instead was something far more profound. I had seen soldiers who lacked the physical advantages that defined my own species choose, again and again, to face impossible odds rather than retreat from their responsibilities. I had witnessed a commander willingly place himself in the greatest danger to protect his team, and I had watched that same team push beyond every reasonable limit of human endurance to ensure their mission succeeded regardless of personal cost. The victory at Threnos Prime proved decisive, crippling the Skarn's broader offensive across the outer rim and buying the coalition critical time to reinforce vulnerable systems throughout the region. Vesa personally commended our squad during the formal recognition ceremony held aboard the Halden's Reach weeks later, acknowledging that the destruction of the central tower had likely saved countless lives across multiple systems. Nathan recovered from his injuries after several weeks of medical treatment, and I visited him regularly during his recovery, our conversations growing into something resembling genuine friendship rather than simple professional respect. He told me, during one of these visits, that what I had witnessed at Threnos Prime was not unique to that battle alone, but represented something fundamental about human nature that had carried his species through countless difficult moments throughout their history. He explained that humans had never possessed the natural advantages that defined strength among most species in the galaxy, yet they had survived and thrived regardless, not through any single extraordinary trait, but through a collective refusal to accept limitation as a permanent condition. He said that when humans were pushed to their absolute limit, something within them refused to simply break, choosing instead to push back against impossible circumstances with everything they possessed, regardless of the personal cost involved. I thought about my own culture in the days that followed, about how Threxian society had always measured strength through physical power and raw endurance, values instilled in warriors from birth. I began to understand that strength existed in many forms beyond what I had been taught to recognize, that the ability to face overwhelming odds without breaking, to place others before oneself despite tremendous personal risk, represented a form of power that no amount of physical strength alone could replicate. Our unit remained together for the rest of the war, fighting alongside each other through numerous engagements that tested our combined abilities time and time again. I came to trust Nathan, Ellen, Owen, and Lucy more deeply than soldiers I had served alongside for years within my own species, understanding that true partnership in combat came not from shared physical capability, but from shared commitment to a common purpose regardless of individual limitations. I had spent my entire career believing that monsters, in the truest sense of the word, were defined by physical power and overwhelming force, qualities that my own species possessed in abundance. I had fought beside creatures capable of tremendous destruction, relying on their raw strength to overcome whatever enemy stood before us. But it was the humans, small and physically limited compared to nearly every other species in the coalition, who taught me what true strength actually meant. Not the strength to overpower an enemy through force alone, but the strength to remain unbroken when every reasonable option had been exhausted, to place the well-being of others above personal safety without hesitation, and to push beyond every known limit when the situation demanded nothing less than absolute commitment. I had fought beside monsters throughout my career, creatures whose strength came from claws and armor and raw physical power. But at Three-Nose Prime, I finally understood that the most dangerous force in the galaxy was not measured in muscle or teeth or armored plating. It was measured in will, in the refusal to accept defeat, and in the quiet, unbreakable resolve that humans carried within them, a strength that no enemy, no matter how powerful, could ever fully comprehend until it was already too late to matter.